Section 11.3, the try-catch statement. This is the most important part in exceptions. To handle an exception in a program, you need to use a try-catch statement. A try block is followed by one or more catch clauses. Each catch clause has an associated exception type and is called an exception handler. When an exception occurs within the try block, processing immediately jumps to the first catch clause that matches the exception type. I'll explain with this. This is a try-catch statement. Try-catch statement starts with try block. Here is, you must have a right brace like this, and we call this try block. And then catch blocks, several catch blocks can be written like this. There are one or more catch blocks, and there may or may not be a final block at the last, like this. This is the try-catch statement. And inside the try block, you must write code that may cause an exception. Okay? And in catch block, you need to write parentheses. Parentheses. Catch is the keyword, and there is a parenthesis. And inside the parentheses, you need to write exception name. Exception name, exception name. These are exceptions that may occur in the try block. Okay? So exceptions that may occur in the try block must be written here. Okay? Like this. And beside the exception name, this is a variable. So you need to create variables like this. Okay? Let me explain how try-catch statement works. This is try block, brace, and you need to write the code that may cause an exception. And there are several catch blocks and finally block. If exception occurs here, then computer sees if this exception is exception 1. If it is, this catch block will be executed. Then all the rest catch statement will be ignored. Okay? This will be executed, and then all the catch statement will be ignored. And finally block will be executed. Okay? The code written in finally block is always executed regardless of our exceptions. So finally block will be executed. And if if the exception occurs here, again, if exception occurs here, and if it's not this exception, then this catch block will be ignored. Then computer says if that exception is exception 2. If it is, this exception block, this catch block is executed. Okay, and then the rest catch block will be ignored. Then finally block will be executed. And likewise, here if exception is occurred, and this is not that exception, this is not that exception, and if this is the exception that occurred here, then this block will be executed, and finally block will be executed. Okay, so it looks like a if-else statement, right? Then I will sum up some important thing here. Even if no exception occurs, in the try block, all catch blocks are ignored. When an exception occurs, only one catch block is executed. All other catch blocks are ignored. Even if multiple exceptions occur in the try block, only the catch block that handles the first exception is executed. Okay, so this is the rule for try-catch statement. Let's see several examples of a try-catch statement. Let's see this main method. There are three variables A, B, and C. A is 5, B is 0, and C is not initialized yet. Then C is A divided by B. And then print out C. And here you know that this line has a problem because denominator is 0. Okay, the computer cannot compute this line, so exception will occur. Actually, if we run this code, then we'll get this output. It says exception in thread main, and this is the exception name, arithmetic exception, and this is the reason why exception occurs. And line 8, there is a line 8. Line 8 is the where exception occurs. Okay. So actually, in fact, if you get this exception, you need to change the value of B, right? You need to change this value to something other than 0. However, I will leave B as 0 to explain how to use try-catch statement when an exception occurs. So we can modify this code into this one to handle arithmetic exception. This line is the same, and you know that this line occurs an exception. This line occurs an exception, and this line is affected by the exception. Okay, so this green box is related with exception. So I will put these two lines into try statement, into try block. Okay, so inside the try block, you must write the lines that can occur exceptions. Okay, and catch statement, there is only one catch statement here because there is only one exception can be occurred in the try statement. So this is the exception that may occur in try statement, arithmetic exception, and this is one variable. Okay, and this is these two lines will be executed when arithmetic exception occurs. Okay, so at first a computer will execute this line and then execute this line, and here exception occurs. Then computer sees catch statement and see if this is the exception that occurred in this line. Okay, and this is the exception that occurs this line, right? Okay, so these two lines, catch blocks, will be executed. So this is the output of this code. And because exception occurs here, the next line cannot be executed. Okay, if this is the line exception occurs, then right after the exception, the computer control goes to catch statement. Then catch statement is executed. Okay, so there is no way to come back this line. Okay, so this line cannot be executed. This is the same example with the previous page, and here the catch block. Let's see the catch block. Catch block tries to handle the exception, this exception, array index out of bounds exception. This catch block will handle this exception. However, in the try block, this exception will not occur. Okay, in the try block, arithmetic exception will occur. So this catch statement is not meaningful. Okay, so if exception occurs here, this exception cannot be caught in the catch statement. Okay, so if we run this code, still we have this message. Okay, because catch cannot handle the exception appropriately, so this catch statement is useless. Okay, so if the catch block in the catch block, we must write the exception that could occur in the try block. Okay? If the exception occurred in the try block is not written in the catch block, the exception cannot be handled. Okay? So this is totally useless code. Okay? So you must be careful. You must know which exception. You must know the name of the exception, which exception can be occurred in the try block, and then you must write that exception in the catch statement. In the catch block, we may also write the parent ancestor exception class. This is the structure of arithmetic exception class. Arithmetic exception class has a parent, runtime exception, and the parent of runtime exception is exception, and the parent of exception is throwable, and object is always the first exception class. Okay, so instead of arithmetic exception, you can write runtime exception, throwable, or object. Okay, here I write exception instead of arithmetic exception. This is also okay. So exception occurs here, then computer sees if this is the right exception or the parent or ancestor exception class of the exception. So if it is, then the exception can be handled accordingly. Okay, accordingly. So these two lines will be executed. But this is not desirable, because if you see this, then which exception is occurred. Okay, so it is nice to write here specific exception name. Okay, this is the example that two exceptions can occur in the try statement. So let's see the code. This is an array, size 5. There are 5 items and 3 variables are declared. And in the try block, C is A divided by 0. You know that since B is 0, arithmetic exception occurs here. And the next line, 10 assigns to A5. 10 assigns to A5. Since there is no A5 in the array, okay, because there are 5 elements, index is from 0 to 4, okay, there is no index 5. So this line will occur array index out of bounds exception. Okay, so two exceptions can occur in the try block. Then computer will run this code like this. At first, computer will make an array and make 3 variables. There is no problem up to here. And in the try statement, the first line here, because B is 0, arithmetic exception will occur. Okay, then computer sees catch statement. Computer sees the first catch statement. And this is the exception that just occurred in the try block. So exception is handled using this catch statement. Okay, so cannot divide by 0 is printed out like this. Then this catch block will be ignored. Okay, and this line is not related with try block, so this line will be printed out like this. This is the same code with the previous one. Here I declare array size 5 and declare ABC variables, and in the try block I switched these two lines. So at first I assign 10 to A5. Then this line will occur array index out of bounds exception. And then A divided by 0 is assigned to B, and this line will occur arithmetic exception. Now you know that. So the computer will run this code like this. At first, make an array and make ABC. Then, computer run this line. Okay, computer will execute this line. And here, array index out of bounds exception occurs. Then, at this line, computer sees catch statement. Okay, computer sees the first catch statement. Arithmetic exception is not that exception. Okay, now the exception is array index out of bounds exception. So this catch statement is not executed. So this is ignored. And then computer sees the next catch statement. This time, this is the exception that occurred in the try block, right? So computer will execute this try block. So you remember that arrays dot toString array name will print out array like this. Okay, so from this line the array is printed out, and this line is not related with the try block, so and the main program will be printed out like this. If there is no exception occurs in try block, then catch blocks will never be executed. Let's see this example. In the try block, there are two print statements, so there is no exception. Okay, so this is the result of this code. The computer will go into try statement, so print hello world and print inside the try block like this. And then there is no exception, so catch block will be ignored. Okay, and then this line is not related with try catch statement, so outside of the try catch block will be printed out like this. Okay, so if there is no exception in the try block, even if there are a lot of catch blocks, all the catch blocks will be ignored. And here I want to explain this one, exception. So try catch exception can be written like this. The exception class can catch all exceptions. So if we write this, the catch part is executed for whatever exceptions can be thrown in the try block. Okay, so whatever exceptions occurs here, this line, this catch block will catch every exceptions. But this is not a good idea. I recommend that specific exception should be written here. Okay. This example includes a finally block. So try here, try catch finally. Okay, and this line is not related with try catch statement. So if we run this code, then try block will be executed and there is no exception. So these two lines will be printed out like this. And there is no exception, so catch block will be ignored. And finally block will be executed regardless of the exception. Always finally block will be executed. So finally block is executed, is printed out here. Then this one outside of the try catch block, this will be printed out at the last. Okay, the code written in finally block is always executed regardless of exceptions. We should be careful when write catch blocks. Here, let's see this one. There are two catch blocks, and the first catch block catches exception, and the second one catches arithmetic exception. As you see here, exception class, this is a parent actually ancestor class of arithmetic exception. Okay, so if we run this code, we have this error message. If we write like this, if we write exception first, then we have this message. Unreachable catch block for arithmetic exception. It is already handled by the catch block for exception. Can you understand this one? This means that if arithmetic exception occurs here, then this catch block will catch that and handles it accordingly. Okay? So there is no way to reach this part. There is no way to reach this catch part. Okay? So this code will have compile error. Okay? The catch block with arithmetic exception cannot be reached because exception catches all exceptions. So you must be careful to write the exceptions in catch blocks. So if you switch this one, then this is okay. Let's see this example. This is the same example we have seen before. A is 10, B is 0, and C is not initialized. And in the try block, C is A divided by 0. So exception, arithmetic exception will occur here, you know that. So this line cannot be executed, okay? So if arithmetic exception occurs here, then computer sees the first catch first. This catch statement, and this is the exception that occurred in the try statement. So cut exception is printed out, and this exception will be ignored, and finally will be printed out, and this line will be printed out. Okay, so this is okay because arithmetic exception written first, okay, before exception. And this one, we switch exception and arithmetic exception. We switch the order, exception and arithmetic exception. In this case, compile error will occur because every exception occurred here will be cut in here, okay? So there is no way to reach this catch statement. So, unreachable catch block for arithmetic exception, it is already handled by the catch block for exception. This is the error message. I will explain Throwable class. This is a top level exception class. The instances of Throwable's subclasses can use all methods of Throwable class, right? Because in inheritance, every child object can use parent method. Two important methods in Throwable are these two, getMessage method and printStackTrace method. GetMessage method returns string, and it says it returns the description of the exception. And printStackTrace will shows the information about the exception that has occurred. Okay, I'll show an example of these two methods. Let's see this example. This main method has a problem. Integer array A has 5 spaces, but 100 is assigned to A7. There is no place A7, right? Because the size is 5, there is only A0 to A4 exists. So if you run this code, then this is the output. This is the output, and it shows the exception occurs. The exception name is array index out of bounds exception, and this is the reason. This is the reason why exception occurs. Index 7 out of bounds for length 5. Okay, and this is the line that exception occurs, you know that. So I handle this exception like this. Because this line occurs exception, this line should be in the try statement, and in catch, array index out of bounds exception should be written, right? Because this line occurs this exception, so the same exception should be written here. And I told you that in catch parentheses, you must write one variable. Okay, you must write one variable. You can use this variable like this. You can use this one as like e.getMessage. e.getMessage. GetMessage method is in the Throwable class. So we can use like this. Then here, this reason is returned here. Okay, this reason is returned in getMessage method. So if you run this code, then exception occurs here. Then computer sees this is the exception that occurred in the try block, and this is the exception. This is the exception occurred in the try block. So this line will be executed, and here e.getMessage will have this reason returned here. Okay, so exception message colon will be printed out, and then this reason is printed out like this. Okay, so now you know how it works. This variable works, and how getMessage method print out. Okay. Now I'll explain print stack trace method in Throwable class. We will use the same code here. A is size 5 array, and I try to assign 100 to A7. This will occur array index out of bounds exception, right? And this is the reason, and this is the line where the exception occurs. So I handle the exception like this. This is a line that exception occurs, so we should put this in the try block, and in catch array index out of bounds exception, and this is the variable. This time I write e.print_stack_trace. Here I call print_stack_trace method through this variable. Okay, then this time this information, this green block, this green part, okay, so this will be printed out like this. Okay, so if you use print_stack_trace method, then print_stack_trace method will automatically will print out this information. Okay, so if you want to see the reason, only reason of the exception, then you can use getMessage method. If you want to see all the information about the exception, then please use print_stack_trace method. Let's talk about finally close. A try statement can have an optional finally close, which is always executed. If no exception is generated, the statements in the finally clause are executed after the statements in the try block finish. If an exception is generated, the statements in the finally clause are executed after the statement in the appropriate catch clause finish. I think you understand this one. Let's see this example. Here, title is Snow White. Then in the memory, the Snow White object will be created like this. And in the try statement, there are 4 print statements. And here, char at 3 is W, and char at 6 is H, and char at 20, there is no 20 index, so exception occurs here. The exception is string index out of bounds exception. Okay, so when you run this code, then here W will be printed out and H will be printed out, and this line exception occurs. So computer sees catch statement, and this is the exception that occurred in try block. So this line is printed out. Okay, so W, H, and catch block, and finally block is printed out regardless of the exception. So inside the finally block always printed out like this. This example does not have an exception. Title is Snow White, so it looks like this. And these three print statements, char at 3, W, char at 6, H, and char at 8 is T, will be printed out, so there is no exception. So catch block will be ignored, and finally block will be printed out regardless of the exception. So this is the exception. This is the print out result. I will explain throws clause. When an exception occurs, we can pass the exception handling to another method by using throws keyword. Let me show you an example of this. Here, there is a make array method and the main method. And in the main method, make array method will be called. So at first, main stars will be printed out, and then make array method is called. Then program control goes here. So at first, array that has size 3 is created. Then the array size 3 will be created like this, and index 0, 1, 2 will be here like this, and 10 is assigned to A0, so 10 is here, and 20 and 30 will be assigned like this, and 40 is tried to assign A3, but there is no place A3. So at this line, array index out of bounds exception occurs. So the program stops and then shows exception information. Okay, so there is no way that it can print main ends. Okay, so we need to handle this exception. I'll show you the handling of this exception. Let's see how the exception is handled in make array. So main is the same. Here make array method is called. So inside the make array method, this part can cause exception. So this part will be included in try block like this. And if the exception occurs here, then the exception will be caught in this catch statement. So this is the exception that can be occurred in this block. So if the exception occurs, then this catch block will execute this line. Okay, so you know that get message will print out the reason of the exception. Okay, so this works okay. So at first main stars is printed out, and then in the make array exception occurs, so catch block will be printed out. So the reason of the exception is printed like this, and then the program control comes back here, so main ends printed out. Okay, so you can see that the exception can be handled in the method like this. I will modify the previous code using throws clause. There is no exception handling in this code. There is no exception handling, even if there is an exception here. Instead, throws array index out of bounds exception is attached here. This means that if this exception occurs inside this method, then make the method that calls this method handle the exception. Can you understand that? here main method calls make array. So main method need to handle the exception. So throws means if exception occurs here, then throws this exception handling to main. Okay, so main has a responsibility to handle this exception. So exception occurs when make array is called. So in the try block, make array is like this, and then catch array index out of bounds exception. Okay, this exception should be the same as this one. And if the exception occurs, the reason of the exception will be printed out. Okay, so there are two ways to handle the exception. You can handle the exception directly on this part, or you can throws the exception to the main. Okay, then main must handle the exception like this.